Hi everyone, in this demo let us understand how to create EventBridge rule for a destination called API destination. Okay, the target is called API destination, which in turn will talk to API gateway endpoint. Okay, so the actual endpoint is API gateway, but for that we have to create an API destination resource within the EventBridge. Okay, so let's get started. So this is the Amazon EventBridge service. Within that, we will be having a default event bus called default. Okay, so this will capture all the events from the various AWS services. It's like the default system bus. Now we will be creating a custom event bus by name, let us say orders. Okay, and before we creating any rules, first we have to create the target. The target in this case is a API gateway REST API endpoint, and this endpoint will be using the mock integration, which simply returns the status 200 back to the clients. There is no actual backend behind the API gateway, but it's a mock integration. And for authorization, we'll be using a Lambda. So the Lambda will take the request coming to the API gateway, authorize the users based on the username and password, and ensures that the credentials are proper. So once the authorization is completed, the request goes to the mock integration, which simply returns the status 200 back to the client. So this is the API gateway that we will be creating in the API gateway console. Okay, and then in EventBridge console, we have to create an API destination resource. And this API destination resource will also have something called a connection resource. The connection will be pointing to the endpoint URL, which for the API gateway. The REST API gateway endpoint URL will be configured as a part of the connection along with the username and password for authentication. Okay, so this is important to note. And after that, then we can create any custom rules for the events. So in the case of the events, we will be defining a simple schema saying that any event comes from a particular source will be matched to this rule, and using this it will be invoking the API destination. And it's also important to note that we have to create a IAM role also to provide permissions to the events.amazonaws.com service to make calls to the API destinations. This is very important. Okay. So once that is done, then we will be creating a custom event and send that event to AWS through AWS CLI to the EventBridge custom bus, which is the orders. Okay. Now, just to recap, what we're going to do is we are going to create a REST API gateway endpoint, and which is publicly available, and it will be using a Lambda authorization to validate the username and password from coming from the clients. It will use a mock integration which does not have any real backend but simply returns the status 200. Now, to invoke the API gateway, we will be using an API destination resource within the event bridge, and this will have something called connection to authenticate the users. I mean, to provide the credential information to the target. And then we'll be creating a custom event through AWS CLI to test the end-to-end flow. Let's get started and go to the code. Okay, so this is the source code where we are going to deploy the Lab2. This is where we'll be creating an event bridge rule to send an event to API destination. Okay, so the important code is part of few files. So let's talk to the event bridge first. Okay, so within the event bridge configuration, we are using the event bridge module. So in the event bridge, we are not creating the bus because we have already created the custom bus earlier, and the rule also is created earlier. We do not want to create that, but we want to create connection and API destination. So that's why both of them are true. The bus name what we have created was orders, and for connections we are using a basic auth connection. The authorization type is basic, which is username and password, and the parameters are username and password, which we are configuring. Okay, so this is a test configuration. This is a connection through which we'll be talking to the endpoint, which is the API gateway. And in the API destination, if you see, we are creating one connection and one destination. The name of the destination is API. So API hyphen destination will be the proper name which will be created. So the invocation endpoint is basically the REST API invoke URL. So we will see the API gateway resources in a minute, but this is the resource with which we can get the invoke URI. So the HTTP method is post and invocation rate I just configured 300. Now the connection name is basic-auth. This is what we have configured here. Okay. Now this is the connection and the destination configuration. Now this is where we are creating the rule. So within the event rule, the event pattern is basically any event which is coming with the source com.aws.orders will be matched to this event and the state is enabled. So that means it's ready to use. Now the target is basically the destination. The destination is API. So if you look at the API, so this is what we have configured. So API destination is the actual target for the rule. And we also need to attach one rule to invoke this destination. Okay. So let us look at the rules. This is very important. So I'm just creating an IAM role, and the trust policy of the IAM role is basically events.amazonaws.com. Okay. So EventBridge is a service which is going to assume this role. Okay. That's easy to understand. And what is important to understand is the actual IAM permissions. So if you look at the operation that we're going to perform is events colon invoke API destination. So this is what we'll be invoking when the event is matched for the rule. Now the resource is very important. It's easy to get confused here with the naming convention. So this is the region name, this is the AWS account name, and this is the API destination slash, and this is where I'll just provide this more clarity here. So API, let's for example, if you look at this entire path, right? API-destination slash API-destination slash star. So this is the name of the feature, and this is the resources names that we are going to create. And here we are providing API as the name here. So automatically hyphen destination will be appended when a resource is created. So that's the reason in the role resource I just appended destination to the API. So you may have a different name, but ensure that the particular destination name is mentioned here. Otherwise the rule will be matched but it will not be triggered. So it will save a lot of troubleshooting time. Okay, so this is the event bridge code. Now let us go to a lambda. Okay, before we go to the lambda, let's first understand API gateway. Okay, now in the API gateway, I'm creating a REST API. Okay, the REST API is regional. That means it can be accessible through internet. And this is the name of the event. And one method which I'm creating for this event is, for this API is post method. Okay, the resource on which I'm creating this is the root resource side, that is a slash. Okay, I'm not creating any custom resource. I mean any child resource here. I'm only talking about the root resource, that is slash. And HTTP method is post, and the authorization is custom. So there are a lot of options here. You can use Cognito or custom, none, things like that. I'm using custom here. So that means I have to provide a custom authorization. So for that, I'm creating a one more authorization object. Okay. So within the authorization object, I'm naming this as a basic hyphen auth. Okay. And this is the REST API ID. This is the authorization URI. Okay. So the lambda function that we are going to create will be the one which is going to authenticate the request. So this is a module.api gateway authorizer. So this is one more lambda, lambda module that we are using it to create the lambda function, and the type is the request, and there are few other parameters required for the authorization in terms of which header we are going to use and the TTL. Now we also need to create one integration resource. Now the integration is a mark. So that means there is no real backend to the API gateway for endpoint. It's simply a mark which simply returns status 200 to the clients. Okay. Now we also need to configure the method response. Again, I'm not using any custom models. I'm just using a default empty model for the method response. Similarly, for the stage, I'm just creating one stage called prod in this case, and for the deployment. So this is a deployment, and anytime if any one of these resources changes, the deployment will be happening. So for example, the gateway API, REST API root resource ID, or the method or the integration, if any one of these resources changes, the deployment will happen, and for that deployment we are naming that as a prod, as a stage. So um, so this is a simple configuration, and apart from that we can also create an integration response, which is also straightforward, not uh, too much of complexity here. And I'm also configuring the method settings. So this is important to understand because I have to enable the CloudWatch logs, metrics also I need to enable, tracing I need to enable, and at the same time I can configure the burst and the rate limits for this API. So all of this is configured through the method settings. Then I'm also creating an account resource which basically configures the IAM role for the API gateway at the account level to write to the CloudWatch logs. Okay, so I'm providing all these permissions: create logs, log streams, put log events, and things like that. So this is important. Otherwise, the API gateway endpoint execution logs will not be available without this role. Okay, so this is the configuration for the API gateway. Now let us look at the Lambda. So in the Lambda, which is an authorization here, so it's a simple Node.js application, and it's also having some managed policies as a part of the execution role. And I'm attaching some policies here. So I'm allowing it to triggered by the API gateway. So this is important because API gateway is the one which is going to call Lambda. So as a part of the resource policy, I'm allowing API gateway to trigger this particular Lambda function. Okay. Now, this is the policy document that this is not required here actually. This was for something else, but we can ignore. If the Lambda is going to access any specific AWS resources, we can provide the corresponding IAM permissions here. Okay. So this was from a previous code, but yeah, we can ignore this for now. So I'm inside this directory. Let me do Terraform init. Init succeeded. Terraform plan. Terraform plan is also completed. Now I will do Terraform apply with auto approve. So the Terraform apply also completed. So this is the event bridge bus name, event bus name. So we have already created earlier. This is a Lambda function, and this is the REST API ID, and this is invocation URL, which will be used by the API destination, and this is the resource ID. Now let's go to the AWS console and see how these resources are created and how they look like. So we're in the Amazon EventBridge console, and you can see there are two rules. Okay, so this is the one which is created right now, and this is going to talk to the API gateway, API destination. So this is the API destination by name API-destination. This is the one is created, and there is a corresponding basic-auth connection which is created. So whenever the API destination is called, it will be using this connection, which will make a call to the corresponding API gateway endpoint. Now we are in the API gateway console, and this is where we created one API called EventBridge-API destination. This is the ID. So this is the root path, okay, and on which we have created the method. We don't have any sub path. So we didn't create any sub resources. On the main only we are creating the method. So if you look at the post method, basically it is using the authorization. So in the method request we're using authorization, and we are sending it to the integration request, and it will be using a mark, okay, mark service, and then responding it back to the clients. So you can see the integration request. Under the integration, you will see the integration type is mark, and the default time is 29 seconds, and rest of the parameters are all default. So I've also created a mapping templates under the integration request. So with the status code as 200. And this is the integration response. Again, it is sending 200 response back to the clients. And this is the method response, response 200, and I'm using the model as empty. I have not created any model. So this is a simple API configuration. So let us send some test event. Okay, I have configured one test event for this demo. So if you look at the event 2.json file, it includes the source com.aws.orders, and this is the order notification is a detail type. Event bus name is orders, and the rest of the fields are same as the earlier one. Okay, now I'm using the AWS CLI, AWS space event space put event, and this is the event ID. Now let's go to the CloudWatch logs to see if this event is arrived. So this is the API gateway execution logs for the API, the V905. This is the ID for the REST API that we have created. So if you look at the logs, so you will see that the event ID, right? This is the event ID that we sent it. Okay, this is the same thing as what we saw here. Okay, starting with 5056. So the same thing is received. So yeah, this is how we can kind of test end to end, all the way from a custom event to the event bridge rule to all the way to API destination and the gateway API. This concludes the demo.